Hello, everyone. Today is October 22nd. This is a special edition release call. It'll be a live cut of a Kubernetes alpha release for 1.17. So it's the 1.17 alpha 3 release. This is a call that will be recorded and available on the internet. So please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct and just in general be awesome people. So we're going to have Marco work on the release today, and we've been going through a few of the steps in the background to prep for this call. So Marco, you wanna start walking people through what you've been working on up till now?
Yes, so first, hello everyone. As Steve has said, we are going to do a alpha release today. I believe I should share the screen and we will go through notes and this stuff. So let's start with that, just a moment. Okay, so you should see my screen now, right? Okay, so what we have first done at the beginning of the day, I have created an issue for release cut, and I have tried to run the mock build of stage, and we encountered some problem. First, we had the problem that Docker version was not as expected, and Stephen managed to fix that and build a new image. And the mock build has been restarted, the mock stage, and it seems to pass these checks. It usually takes plenty of time, so we will see how it goes. And I have created a screenshot of boards. There was some problem with the screenshot tool because it refused to upload to the some server, but I have managed to change the script by copying the file from some temporary to non-temporary location and uploading it manually. We have several jobs running, failing with SIG release master informing dashboard. It is GC cost master serial, master slow, GC master scale correctness, GC master scale performance, and GC Windows master. And if you open the each here on GitHub, you will see the screenshot of what is exactly failing. So this is something we have done so far. Stephen, do you have some idea how we should proceed? Should we go ahead? We have run this one. Do we need to wait for something? How we should proceed right now?
Yeah, so why don't you walk through the steps that you've been going through in the branch manager handbook?
Oh
Because not
yeah.
everyone on the call has the context that you just the context about the steps that you just went through. So.
Okay, so to start from the beginning, here is the branch management rulebook. I will share the link just a moment to see. Is it possible for me? Oh, it is. Okay. So it first explains some general requirements. And now we have some things that we had to do at the beginning. The first one was to get the GCP permissions, and I have got that at the beginning of the day by Stephen. And then there is a problem with Kubernetes announce and problem with the permission of that mailing list. So we are going to see how are we going to handle that when we come to this part. Machine setup, it is required to have the Linux machine. And I have found out that you must have Fedora or Ubuntu machine, like it is not going to work with Arch Linux. It is not going to pass the prerequisites checks. So I believe I will update that at some point. And
So just a note here, these might not be all the way up to date. You should be able to use Mac to run the scripts as well. Can you open up a terminal and show people these steps?
okay, yes. So where we have, so first, what we have here is the release repository. It is GitHub Kubernetes release. to use the script that is running all this stuff, it is called gcbmgr. And to use it, first you need to clone the repository, and you must clone it using the HTTP endpoint, because if you use Git protocol here, the check is not going to pass. And we are going to run the tool. If you run without any arguments, it is just going to run safety checks. And it is going, wait, why it failed now?
Because you might have made changes to your repo, so your local is dirty.
It shows nothing. Its status is clean state. Wait, just to check something. Not sure, is it smart to show git config
Probably not.
like this? Wait, I will stop sharing for a moment. Yes, I have comment this stuff. Let's remove it. Sorry, just to, I will continue sharing. But it is, wait, let's try. Okay, there was some changes. And yeah, if you get this such message, it says run git pull, so maybe something changed. Maybe you have changed something, or maybe something got changed on the upstream. So it is going to run some checks. It is going to show green OKs and last 5 jobs, which means that it should be safe to run the process how it goes on next.
All right. So with regards to the Scratchpad, can you include some of the problems that you ran into? So one of the ones that you mentioned was the test grid shot issue.
Which one? The test grid job issue.
Did you add that to the log already?
I have added that I had a problem to
Okay.
screenshot, if
All
you
right.
meant on that.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, and I can add later this one as well. Okay, I can add it now. I think we have,
So that check is basically doing a comparison between your between the upstream remote and your local copy, right? So as people just saw, if you have an issue, there are new changes in the repo that you haven't pulled in yet. The tool will not allow you to run it. There's a way to work around that. There's a release tool repo as well as a release tool branch environment variables that you can use to specify the repo and the branch. So you can still, what you could do is say you're testing out changes and you want to, that haven't merged yet and you have access to GCP to test them out. You can use those environment variables to try them out before before the PR is merged, right? So
yeah.
then you would essentially point to your remote and the branch that your PR is against to try those changes out.
Okay, so after that, I guess we can continue. The next step is usually after you run the safety check, is this one also required you to have Google Cloud SDK and to run gcloud in it. Basically, it will, when you run that command, it will show you to login page for Google account. And if you want to check the version, you can run gcloud version on their website. It is going to be the same one. So the test one is recommended before running the process. And after that safety check that we have run, this is some general recommendations. We have already created the issue. I have shown it at the beginning of the meeting. And we are going to need this for later. This one has the format, how we should post the comment with comments and how much it took. And then we are at the alpha release and the alpha stage. So the first thing that I have run like 1 hour ago, or because they failed a little bit less ago, is to run the GCB MGR stage master. This one returns relatively quick. Can we run this one again, or what's going to happen?
There's no need to run it again. It's 29 minutes in. So here is the build log that you can see.
Yeah,
So people who don't have access to GCB won't be able to see that, but Marco has it up on the screen.
so when you run the command from here, it is going to show you this URL that you can paste in your browser and scene. Now this is requiring permissions, but if you're cutting the release, you will be able to see it. It says that it is in progress and some information about that. And we have logs here. So at the beginning, it is pulling the needed images. And after that is done, we have
So
some
let
checks.
me actually, I'll share my screen for a second.
Okay.
And you can see, so here are the logs running, as Marco mentioned. You'll see that there are a set of build steps here, right? And I guess it's valuable to understand a little bit about what GCB Manager is doing, right? So GCB Manager is essentially a wrapper tool around Inago. Inago is our release tool, right? So so if we go over here and uh, okay, are we sure? That's probably not true anymore. Okay, right. Everyone can see the screen okay? Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we can see it.
great. All right, so what we're doing here is, so essentially what, if we take a look at GCB Manager for a second, there is, I mean, it's long-ish of a script, but the parts that we really care about, at least for this call, are the stage it and release it functions, right? So basically what we're doing here is checking to see if a release branch has been set. If it has, we're also going to query for the release kubectl version, right? And that's in the release library. So that's under k release and then lib and then release lib.sh, right? And basically what it's doing is it's looking for the most recent version of the cross image, right? So the cross image is over here. Right, and what is it? Right, so looking for that version / build image and then version. Okay, or not. Okay, that's great. Sorry. Oh, cross, that's what I was missing. Now you can see there's a version file here, right? Version 1.12.12-1. So what this is basically it's pointing to the version of Go that we're using, right? And the reason we're doing this is the reason we're basing our some of our stuff on this image is because we want to make sure that we're trying to stage and release the artifacts using the same version that the Kubernetes repo is using, right? So going back here, if we take a look at GCB Manager again, right? So it's doing that, and then it's using, and then it's going for the submit it function, right? And submit it is going to do a few things, right? Submit it, so these substitutions, this local variable here, if you're familiar with Google Cloud Build, right? I don't need so many. G-Cloud build submit, right? So, I mean, here's the help for Google Cloud Build submit, and if you just go down, you'll see that. Right. So substitutions, parameters to be substituted in the build specification, right? So if you were to submit this job yourself, you would have to go Google Cloud, build submit, and use the correct config, and then set up these substitutions. Substitutions are basically variables that are subbed in for the Google Cloud build. And so uh, so variables that are present in a Google Cloud build need to be prepended with a underscore, right? That lets GCB know that it's a user specified variable, right? But you can see that this can get, depending on how many variables you have, this can get kind of hairy, right? So favorite color blue, number of candies 10, blah 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 blah, right? So what we want to do instead is basically seed the set of substitutions. You can see that there are a bunch of them, right? Whether or not we're using an official tag, whether or not it's a no mock release, whether or not it's an RC, and then we're just doing some additions, right, to that string. So the build point, the GCP user tag, whether or not to build it head, what the cube cross version is, and then more stuff, right? Release. So imagine typing this all out on the command line. It's not pretty, right? So this is essentially just a wrapper around adding the substitutions. And then finally, we're doing a G-Cloud build submit with no source. That means we're not pointing at any directory to tar and upload to GCB. We're setting a config file, right? And you can see for the yeah, the YAML file, where is that? Anyhow, the YAML file, there are a few different YAML files to look at. We'll look at the stage one first. It sets disk size as well as passing in the substitutions that we said earlier, right? And then the log echoes are essentially runs that will write to standard out as well as to a log file. The log files are viewable later in GCS, right, or Google Cloud Storage, right? And then it tells you after you do the submission exactly where to look. There are a few different ways to tail the logs, right? You can look at the previous build. You can look at the specific build that you're running at that point, or you can use the gcloud command to do builds log stream, right, for that build ID. And then we'll also give you a link for that build, for where the build is happening, right? So that will resolve to this link, right, of the running build, right? Now for the stage, you'll see where all of these substitutions kind of come into play. So we have a directory here that is GCB. So krelease /GCB, and you can see that there are a few different GCB configs here: build, release, and stage. The variance YAML is used. I talked about this briefly on another either SIG release or release engineering call around using the image builder. So I won't go into details here, but build, stage, and release are the ones that we care about, right? So within the stage one, there are a few things going on. Secrets are set, right? So everyone freaks out a little bit about this token being in here. The token is base 64. It's a base 64 encoded encrypted blob, right? The encryption key for that blob is only stored in KMS and Google GCP KMS, right? So I've added a note here to say don't freak out about seeing this here. It's okay. Now we can also see translating kind of uh, from the build steps that you can see in the GUI um, compared to what it looks like uh, in a build config file, right? You can see step. The name of the step is essentially the image that you're going to use, right? So this one says we're going to use the Git Cloud Builder with this directory, right? Notice that the directory is doesn't have a slash in front of it. It is relative to the workspace directory, right? Within GCB, the workspace directory is the directory that persists artifacts, right? So if you specify a directory that is relative to it, it means that these artifacts that are the artifacts that are created from any release step will get persisted across the next one, right? So the first thing we're doing is we're cloning the release tool repo. So we're cloning krelease, right? The next thing that we're doing is we're using this kubectl version. We're using this image that's specified by the kubectl version, which is apparently not set here, but set in GCB instead, right? So this is one of you see that this has an underscore here. That's one of the substitutions that are submitted before the build is actually run, right? So it's saying let's go into the krelease directory, set these environment variables, and then do a compile release tools, right? So compile release tools will, as the name implies, compile the release tools. So it will do a check just to make sure you have the correct dependencies in place. It'll set up the environment, making sure that the Go binaries path is set in your actual path, right? And then it will compile the blocking test grids test, right? So this is essentially used to verify if you don't specify a build with build at head, it will attempt to find a green build, right? So it'll look for it'll look at master blocking and try to discern if there is a green build, and then use that build to use that SHA to do the staging, right? Here we're using build at head. We're probably going to remove the functionality here because the way that we pull the build numbers is going to change very soon. But that is a story for a different time. So going back to the stage, we can see that the next step is let's pull the krelease cloud builder. Let's go back into that release directory using that token that we set above, right? So this is the token for the release bot, and which is just a GitHub user that has access to do the GitHub user that is part of the release manager's GitHub team, which allows it to write to GitHub and more specifically push a new release to GitHub, right? So eventually we're going to want to say that, okay, the stage was successful, let's release this thing and make sure that it's tagged, and that bot will be responsible for doing that, right? So we're running the Inago tool with the release branch. We're saying that it's a stage and a pre-build, whether or not to build at head. So if these substitutions are specified, it will drop in a command line flag, right? If not, it'll just be blank, right? No mock, official, build. So at different stages, it'll discern whether or not this is an official build, whether or not you're doing an RC or whether you're using a build version, right? Yes means let's any user prompts, let's answer yes to them so that we can run it in an automated fashion. GCB lets it know that it is running within GCB as opposed to locally, because you can also use this to run locally if you wanted to, using just this Inago command, right? And then where we're starting off, that base directory that I mentioned, workspace, and then where the temp directory is going to be, right? So again, we're making sure that this temp directory persists across the releases, right? Now we're using a kubectl local image that was built within this step. And then we're doing a build only, right? So this is pre-build. This is kind of like the pre-flight checks for the staging process. And then the build only will just do a cross build, right? And then finally, we're doing a and then finally we're just doing the full stage, right? And this will, if no mock is set, then this will actually do things like push artifacts to certain places, right? And then the build, and then the release portion of that will essentially just run, we'll do the release itself, right? So releasing those artifacts or moving those artifacts from the staging area into release buckets that people can actually access, right? So that is some of the overview of some of these tools. There's lots of hidey holes and scary bits of some of this stuff. For example, Anago is an 1868 line bash script, right? Which, if we look up here, we can also see that it's importing 3 other bash scripts, right? That are bash libraries that do a lot of the, so Common does a lot of the things like, let's validate that you have the correct amount of arguments, or let's do a common exit. So it'll kind of wrap an exit code as well as an error message. So Common will do some of that stuff. And then GitLib, as the name implies, has a bunch of functions around handling Git commands. And then ReleaseLib has a bunch of functions around manipulating artifacts within GCP, right? So let's go back to, I was hoping that by the time I was done talking, this would be done. But it's still going.
Seems like it's still in progress, but might be done soon.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let you take the screen back.
How long does the average build take?
Depending on what kind of build it is, somewhere between 35 minutes and an hour and 20. So when we get to
It's quite the window.
Yes. So when we get to, so the reason for that, the median is closer to like 45, 52 minutes, right? The reason for the longer build as we approach, so this is the final alpha build, as we approach the only one that takes the one that takes the longest is the beta 0, right? And the reason for the beta 0 taking longer is it's doing 2 things, right? It's cutting an alpha as well as a beta, right? So as you move into that new branch, it basically has to stage the assets from the previous alpha, as well as staging the assets for the beta 0. So it takes about double the time.
Yes, so that's right. And in the document I mentioned that there are some examples like it was 115, probably stuff changed, but it was like 48 minutes and 17 minutes for the release. So it is like that on average for alpha. So this is usually, I guess, how much it takes. I'm not sure about 116, and we will see about 117 now.
Yeah, we need to, I think we need to merge that branch management log with the Scratchpad, because we have some duplication of information there.
Okay, so I have a question actually. Should we wait for this a little bit more? Not sure what can I show in the meanwhile. Should I go what we'll do next, or?
Yeah, keep going through the steps.
Okay, so as we said, this is going to take a little bit more longer, hopefully to be done soon. Also, with the GCB manager tool, you can also have commands such as list and tail. Tail is going to show logs in your terminal, so you can use that one as well if you don't like the UI. And once this is done, the next thing we are going to do after stage is release. And this is basically to build your stuff and then to push the artifacts once done. But first we are running the mock stage, and we will probably run mock release too. After we confirm that everything works, we are going to run non-mock builds for stage and for release, and then we should have the release. I guess that process is going to take a little bit more time, so we will have alpha in like few hours. And how is this going to look like? When the previous command is done, this stage, it should output the command such as this one. It is going to contain the build version, and as we know, we are going to run that one. It is going to do the release process, and after the mock part is done, we are going to use the no mock flag, and it is going to do everything, and we should have the release.
All right.
Now,
So I'm going to steal the screen again, and because what I want to try to do is, so first to answer the questions about the Go rewrite, it's, yes, fun, I think, is a word for it. It's going to be hard, right? And yes, Daniel and a few others that have expressed interest, you can feel free to have at it. I just need to make sure that people go about it the right way. I have an active PR open if you want to look at it. It is here. So this is one of the many release tools that we have. I haven't had a chance to get back to this, but that's like the first of the many to rewrite. I think it would probably make sense to rewrite push build next. Although, yeah, so essentially what I need to be careful of is people who making sure that things are rewritten in a way that will not affect the current process. So what I want to do is show you, okay, so you're going to see a lot of failures. Don't worry about the failures that are in this list. It's actually me testing out something entirely different. Yeah, there are a bunch of failures here. Testing out the staging, the build process, right? So what I want to do is be able to replace the current build process that we have using CI. So to just show you that really quickly, right. So there is a Kubernetes CI build job, right? Which does a few things, right? It uses the bootstrap image in test infra to, so the bootstrap image by default has like a CI runner. The CI runner points to, the CI runner takes a few arguments. It's basically saying, I want you to check out the Kubernetes repo first and use this as your primary workspace. I want you to then check out the release repo. I want you to use go/source as the root of this workspace. There's a timeout of 2 minutes, and then to run a scenario, right? So this is stuff that people usually never see, the scenario Kubernetes build, and then we're going to pass some arguments to that scenario, right? So it's allow dupe, extra publish file, case master, hypercube, and registry, right? Now, if we go over to the scenario itself, right? It takes a little while to do the investigation to figure out where all of these things live. But if you want to read more about it, I'm going to speed over it. But if you want to read more about it, it's here. Yeah, I did a write-up on, so you can start from here. And it's actually something that it's confusing. And basically what happened is we made some changes to some of the release tooling, which broke builds across all of Kubernetes, which we had to revert some of those changes. But digging into it, I think not enough people know where all of the places to go to find information on some of these things are. So I figured writing it up would be a good thing. So I walk through some of the test failures that happen, and then explaining actually what the job does, right? So this is right out of the job, explaining what the image does, the entry point for the image, the arguments that the image has, and then what we're actually doing, right? So we're eventually doing a make clean, a make quick release, or a make release, depending on whether or not the fast argument is set, and then doing using the push build script, right? So the push build script is in the release repo, and you can see it's doing a few things like checking the release bucket, staging the artifacts locally, hashing all of those artifacts, pushing the artifacts. If we specify a registry, it'll do a Docker build, and then release those artifacts, those container images to that registry, and then finally publish the versions. And yeah, there's quite a bit of stuff there. So because this is so hard to kind of nail down, what I wanted to do is write something that will kind of mimic the flow that we're doing here with the GCB manager, but without GCB manager. So that build.yaml that's in there, this just got merged. Essentially, it's doing the clone of the two repos, Kubernetes, and then the release repo, doing the make clean, make release in a container, and then doing a push build, right? So push build is in this repo if you want to check it out. It's here. And again, another long script, or it's not too bad. That essentially does some of those steps I mentioned. So checking prerequisites, doing copies of the release artifacts, and then pushing Docker images if that flag is specified, right? So what was the reason for me saying all of this stuff? To explain these failures, right? So a bunch of these are me just kind of vetting out the process. But what we care about, since this, just make sure. Yeah, since this build is still running, what we care about are the ones that were actually successful. And we'll do that, right? And I'm gonna try to figure out the time 15th, maybe, of the last release, right? So Marco showed you, so Marco showed you some of the output, right? So this is actually doing a release. This is, what we want is probably one of these, maybe. Okay, great. So this is a stage no mock official, and what it's doing is releasing 1.16.2, right? So it's basically pointing at a version that was already staged, and it's promoting that from 1.16 beta 0 into 1.16.2, right? If we go speed through the logs, you'll see that comment that Marco pointed to before. And after the push binary releases portion, you'll see it gives you an instruction. Here's what you can do if you want to actually release. And I don't know if you can see that, but here's what you can do if you actually want to release that version, right? So that's essentially what's in the documentation. Right? All right. Cool. Any questions so far?
I have a question about flags here. Flags used for the release comment. It seems like you have mentioned there is like official flag, but it seems like it is for official release, and I think I have seen it for beta too. Is it something we are not going to use for alpha, or no? When is it used exactly?
It's used for the official releases, so the .0s.
So we don't need it, right?
Possibly also the RCs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Here again, once the build passes, it'll tell you exactly what command to run. Cool. Other questions? All right.
I think this is a good introduction to kind of get down in the weeds of it. For myself, I still need to go over the release engineering handbook and really understand what's going on.
Yeah. So I mean and really, we have to. There are a few things that we have to do. We have to figure out what the structure of this role actually looks like. The reason that I brought a lot of you on, specifically people who have been on the release team before as release manager associates, is because I trust you. You have done the work for quite a few sessions of understanding at least how SIG release works. So there's some there's some thought that you will be tenacious and at least understand where to go to look for information. Need to make sure that that's happening because a lot of this is unknown work. Some of it is defined but not tightly scoped. So it's a lot of it is exploration. Some of this I'm learning on the fly as well. So the hope is that the people that are part of this role will be like, hey, I noticed this is broken. Can I go fix it? Like, yes, you can. That's exactly why I want you working on this. So more stuff forthcoming in terms of write-ups and maybe more of these sessions. But for now, just start looking around the repos, see what's broken, see if someone's working on it, and go to work. That release is still running. That is, huh.
I guess it's a little bit longer than usual, but let's hope it will work.
Yeah, ooh, this might fail. 24, 46. Yeah, this is set up to fail. Okay, let me one more time. Okay, so in the background, what I'm also doing to fix this, to make this build piece work, is essentially rebuilding. There's kind of a messy Docker file here right now, which is, okay, that's up to date. The indentation still getting messed up. It's weird. So I added some pieces to what is the Docker file for the images Kate's Cloud Builder, right? And these are stored in right. So these are staging, essentially staging images, right? But we do use the Kate's Cloud Builder to run the staging and release process. the staging and release GCB runs, right? So the problem that Marco was mentioning earlier is that we have a, as you can see, we have a few images that are, this is weird, okay. We have a few images that are kind of old, right? You see that, some are from 2017, 2018. The image that we were using was actually from 2018, September 4th. It looks like people were updating and this is the kind of thing that's like, you only know it because you've run into it and it might not be documented yet, right? So one of those things are that there's an image around September 4th or 7th. This actually might be the right one, where that one was tagged as latest. Since we're using the same image and it's wired into the image pushing process in test infra, essentially when those images get pushed, we can see a cloud build YAML here, right? When those images get pushed, we're using kind of like a Docker tag variant, which is like the version, the year, month, day, plus G and the hash, right? So you can see that here, right? This tag will be, so the release repo is currently at 013, right? And this will be like a build number plus G plus a short hash. So we can see that if we just do a git log, we'll do it pretty or not. Okay, cool, awesome. Right. So this is C2A AD36, right? And you can see that that was, that's that part of the tag, right? So the older images were what we were using to do the staging process before. And I feel like one of the images was tagged as latest, but was not actually the latest. Or the newest one, sorry, the old newest one was not the latest. And I think a previous old one was being used as the latest tag for the stage and releases, right? So we're running into basically issues because no one has tried to touch these images in a year, right? So I held off on merging the one of these PRs because we recently had a set of releases. I think was it last Thursday or so. We cut 4 releases, and I didn't want this issue to be a problem, and apparently it is now a problem. So if you want to check out this issue, I walk you through basically how we're going about building the new images, as well as you can see kind of exactly how it's set up, the variance file, right? So it's passing in the substitutions that we were talking about earlier in a slightly different manner. So it's using this variance file to circumvent the GCB manager, which eventually what I would love to see is all of the variants moved into this variance.yaml file and not using GCB manager at all, right? So you can see there are quite a bit of additions to this Docker file to add gcloud, to add Docker, and to update some of the Python dependencies. So I'm probably going to have to go back and poke at that a little bit today to try to find a resolution. This build I'm pretty sure will fail. I ran a build immediately prior using the new image, and I got this. This is push build, publish. Okay, this was, no, this is not the right one. This is the one we care about. All right. So it will, so the fork I'm using is here. Basically, all I'm doing here is making sure that Anago is going to be verbose, right? So just adding a bunch of verbose flags to each of those steps so that I can get a little bit more information about why the build is failing. So if we look at one of those failed builds, failure. Right, if we look at one of those failed builds, and it's one of the longer ones, 118, right? That's, I shouldn't expect the build to take that long, the staging process at least, right? And we see here that within this step, right? So this was the verbose one. Let's do a not so verbose one. Right, so towards the bottom, it'll say, we tried to stage the source tree and so you can see that a little better. Tried to stage the source tree, it failed. And then, the release is incomplete and it'll exit, right? And this is not super useful, especially if you go here. If you just grab this bucket and, right, you'll see some errors like this, right? So if I do a gsutil lsal, right, I'll get information on the logs that are in this bucket. But if I try to do anything more, right, like let's say here, and you can kind of already see on my screen what's coming. Right. Right, so it's telling me that, I do not have the I don't have get access on this bucket, right? And the reason for that is because we want to protect those assets, right? So even I don't have access to the Kubernetes release, which is the official bucket. So it makes it kind of hard to figure out what's going on, right? And then these logs don't give you much in terms of exactly what the failure was, outside of the fact that it was at the tar stage, right? So if we look at the longer one here, right, you can see that now that it's in verbose mode, it's spitting out this is not super useful information, right? Outside of knowing exactly where these things are. But if I'm doing a tail of these logs, right? So if I go up a little bit, right? So remember I said that Anago will, I'm gonna run out of screen here. Yeah, okay, all right. So basically the logs, it was saying that the logs are too long to display. Logs are too large to be fully displayed on this page, right? Which means that if I wasn't running the tail, I would have lost what was going on, right? And what was going on is here. It looks like there is an issue with the positions of the tar arguments, right? So I'm just going to grab that error message before I lose it. And yeah, so it's saying the following options used after any non-optional arguments in archive or create or update mode. These are positional and only affect arguments that follow them. Please arrange them properly, right? So somewhere, somehow, this happened, right? And this happens in, trying to remember exactly where this is. If we take a look at, right, and just to give you some history on the script, 2007, right? And I believe there are probably some lines that go back to 2006 in Inago. So it's nothing here. I believe it's probably in one of the libraries where the tar is set. Or cool, awesome. Okay, that's not the one, but it's around here. It's somewhere around preparing the tarball. So I wonder if it's something that I did recently. Anyhow, that's something for me to debug off the call, I think.
Are you looking for that document?
Sorry, what?
Are you looking for that document that has exclude output?
Yeah, that's actually in
I think I have found it in Anago 1452.
1452. All right. Yep, that's the place. Source tree. Right. So yeah, this is off. And I'm wondering, oh, this is painful. Okay, no, that doesn't work. Okay, what happened? Uh-oh, was it me? Might have been me. Okay, that was something recent. All right, so this looks like it will probably be easy enough to fix, and then we can rerun a stage. One of the things to note about the release, so any questions on all of this stuff? I know it's kind of a wall of information. Okay, all right. So yeah, one of the things to note about the release process is I mean, the whole point of us putting it into GCB is so that it can be semi-unattended, right? So when we have calls like this, there's a lot of waiting and nothing happening, right? You notice that we kind of like, we stared at the build a few times. After you run that GCB, stage command, it's, okay, go grab a cup of coffee, maybe grab something to eat, check out your emails, come back, see if the thing is done. So it's not something that we necessarily need to do synchronously for these calls. These calls are really about just asking questions to understand a little bit more about the process. So if you were to go through the process end to end, doing the mocks for each stage stage. So it would be a mock stage, it would be a mock release, and then the actual stage and the actual release, right? And then release notifications and all that stuff, right? If you go through that process, right? So we said about 45 plus minutes for the staging bit, right? So we're looking at an hour and a half between the mock and the actual stage, right? Plus, let's give it, you know, another 30 minutes for each of the release sides, although it's closer to 20, right? So that's, you know, you're looking at 2.5 hours, right? So again, these calls are not for people to sit on for 2.5 hours to see how the process is going. It's kind of a thing that we shoot off into the cloud, and we come back and check eventually. So we're obviously not done with the alpha for today. What we've done in the past for recorded releases is to have multiple sessions. I don't think we need to do that since there are already multiple sessions of recorded releases out there today. So I want to take some time to answer any questions if anyone has any, and if not, we're going to go to work to fix these tar failures.
I've got nothing. I'm just soaking it in. I appreciate you scheduling this and sharing the session.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, same. Have fun debugging.
Yes, same here. Thank you so much for all the detailed explanations. It means a lot. I have a question regarding the plan. Do you want to go ahead and fix the failures and then let me run the next commands again, or what's your plan? Or do you want to pick up from here?
I want to just make sure, yeah, I'm going to make sure that tar command's right. Once that's done, yeah, then back over to you.
Okay.
I'll be poking at stuff in the background, so you'll see builds running in the background as well, because I'm working on some other stuff. But yeah, once I push a PR for that, you can and we get that merged, you can proceed with running this
Okay.
again.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, last call for questions. Okay, all right. Take it easy, everyone. Thanks for joining.